Good morning. It's Wednesday, April 8th. We have 2 more days. We're going to read 2 pieces of poetry today. These are from some very, very famous writers. The first one is by a poet named Walt Whitman, and the second one is by a woman named Harriet Beecher Stowe, who was known for her writings on slavery. So first we're going to read, and this will probably fall into 2 different lessons because we're going to do a little bit of questioning with this one today. And it's poetry. We haven't really done any work with poetry so far this year. Then we're going to do our guided practice with our vocabulary and comprehension questions. You're going to do that independently. And then we're going to start our writing organizer. That's going to be a little more over on this side. So we'll be working on all 3 of those pieces today. I want to bring you back that our lesson is based on our essential question: how do ordinary people play a part in making history? And we're going to connect this to how are ordinary people making history and becoming heroes during what's going on with our current COVID pandemic, and then also how can you become an everyday hero during the time right now. Finally, we're going to focus on our 3 standards. Although we're going to do a whole bunch of different standards, these are the 3 that we're focusing on. I can read, comprehend, and connect to complex text. In this case, at a 5th, 6th level. I can cite text evidence and draw on text evidence to support my writing and use technology to publish it. And these are both 6th grade skills. All right, here we go. So we're going to flip to this page. Now, poetry is a little bit different. So this is definitely, so the genre is actually poetry. It's the type of genre. This is poetry that is based on real facts. And so we would call this is like a kind of a primary source, because this is, actually this one is not, the other one is. So this one is not a primary source because Walt Whitman was never a slave. He never experienced this himself. So this is actually called a secondary source. He's imagining what it would have been to be a slave. But if you look at our next one, Harriet Beecher Stowe lived during the time of slavery. So she's writing this about things that she has experienced. And when we say things that you've experienced, then that is considered a primary source, something that was written during the time in which the event happened. All right, so we're going to focus on the first one, and we're going to read it together because sometimes poetry can be a little bit harder to do. So we're going to do what we always do. What's the first thing we always do when we have a new text? Remember, when I ask a question, you're going to answer it out loud. We find the text features. All right, so we have this. What is this text feature called? Title. Runaway slave. So I'm going to think about all the things that I know about slavery. I'm going to think about what I know about Harriet Tubman. I'm going to think about what I know about the drinking gourd. All these things that I know. And then I write Song of Myself. So I'm thinking myself. So if I'm saying this is my song, who is telling the story? Me. I'm telling the story. We call that a narrator. The narrator is the person telling the story. All right, and then I'm going to look down here. What's this text feature? Illustration. What do I notice? They always give you details in here. So look at the picture really carefully. What are you noticing? Okay, did anyone pick up on these things? So definitely poor, tatters, right? He's wearing suspenders, so it's from a long time ago. We usually don't use buckets like this anymore, so definitely from a long time ago. Then we're going to go down to the bottom. What do we call this down here? Glossary. We have stopped. Notice that it's spelled incorrectly. So a lot of times things were spelled differently back in the day. And also if they're trying to show maybe how someone would say it. So if they, like for instance, a lot of times people say things like, I asked him where he was going, right? We say that all the time. And so to convey that, or I always say this, right? Not a real word, but sometimes in writing, it might say things that we use in our speech. So this would be one. He stopped. Limpsy, he's walking with a limp. Assured, to reassure or comfort. Plasters. Plasters are the old way they used to provide Band-Aids because they didn't have Band-Aids that stick with the fancy patterns and stuff on them now. So you would get a plaster, and it was a cloth and it had medicine on it. It would stick to your wound. Galls. Galls are sores. Stayed. Notice that it's spelled differently. Stayed. And a firelock is a type of rifle, kind of like in our last story we learned of the name of a musket. And this is in the time of slavery. So slavery would have begun from the very beginning. So 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Columbus took slaves. From the very first time that Europeans came to the Americas, they took native people as slaves. And slavery would have gone all the way until the mid 1800s during the time of the Civil War. And we've talked about this a little bit. So we don't know when this took place, but we know it's during the time of slavery. All right, so we're going to do a little bit of reading, and then I'm going to ask you some questions, and we'll probably stop, and then we'll move on to the next one, because these are a little bit harder. Poetry always seems like it's going to be easier when it's actually a little bit harder. The runaway slave came to my and stopped. I heard his motions crackling through the swung half door of the. I saw him limpsy and went where he sat on and led him in and assured and brought and filled for his sweated body and bruised, and gave him a room that entered from my own, and gave him some coarse, clean, and remember well his revolving eyes and remember putting plasters on the galls of his, and he stayed with me before he was recuperated and passed north. I had him sit next me at table. My firelock leaned in the. All right, there are a couple of really good words in there, so I'm going to go back and make sure we got them all. So we have awkwardness and recuperated, got better. All right, and we were talking about this in science. He passed north. So why was he headed north? What's up north? Yeah, we learned about this in some of our other stories. Freedom, right? If they could make it to Canada, they could be free because they didn't have slavery up there. All right, so who is telling us the story? Do we know? No, just the narrator. It can be a man, it could be a woman, we don't really know. But whoever is speaking, they are telling the story. I heard his motions. Now, what does the setting look like? Give me some details of the setting. What are some things about, what is setting again? Where and when? Now, we know it's going to take place somewhere during this time period. We're not sure which. But what about the place, the actual place? Well, there's a kitchen, a wood pile. There was a tub with a room. And there was a gun resting in the corner. Who are the characters of this piece of poetry? Who are the two characters? Well, we have the runaway slave, and we have I. What do we know about the condition that the slave is in? What do we know about his body? All right, he was limpsy and weak. Anything else? He was sweaty and bruised. He needed bandages on his neck and ankles. How does the narrator feel about the slave? How does he feel about him? Now, this is one of those ones where you have to make an inference. The answer is not right there, but you can find clues. So how would you say the narrator feels? And then give me some text evidence. So I'm going to give you a minute to decide. Try to give me at least one emotion, how you think he feels. And then give me text evidence that shows. All right, so you might have said something like he wants to help him. He feels sorry for him. What were some things that showed us that he felt sorry for him and wanted to help him? He assured him. He brought him water to clean up. He gave him a room. He cured him. He sat with him at the table and protected him with a gun. So these are all some things that explain how he helped him. All right, so I'm going to pause right here. I'd like you to stop before we come back, and I'd like you to read Eliza Crossing the River. So we're going to read Eliza Crossing the River. We're going to think a little bit about what the story is telling us, and then we'll answer our questions, and that'll be it for today.